You're on the air. Don't say anything crazy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Brobears Talk. Today we're joined by my biological brother, Sebi, with the honorary yet temporary title of Brobear for the duration of this podcast, which will be immediately repealed upon the conclusion of this recording. Now, speaking to our audience of 8 subscribers, and thank you for your support, our engagement with all 8 of you is second to none. By next year, we should be... By next year, I think we might be down to 4, which means we'll have that much more time to spam you with ever more high-fidelity audio-only content, which will be great. But, Sebi, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on for the first, and I'm sure not the last time. And just to give you a bit of context, we're going to be talking about sustainability and then a deep dive into bees and how they fit into the sustainability matrix. So, Sebi, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that introduction, brother. Biological brother. I don't think I'm allowed to say brother bear.
Bro bear. No, it feels weird, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. But yeah, thank you, and I look forward to the coming conversation.
Welcome to the podcast, Sebi, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I love how Andre introduced you as his biological brother, just in light of the fact that you're referring to nearly every other guest and myself as brother or bro bear on here. So, welcome, Sebi. It's great to have a blood relation of a bro bear on this podcast.
It's all very confusing.
Yeah.
He's the true bro bear. He's the real bro bear.
I'm the only legitimate brother here, I reckon.
Well, we'll debate the significance of bro bear versus biological bro bear later. That's a new topic
On
that
another
no one
podcast
cares about.
that no one's ever going to listen to.
Now, Sebi, I just want to understand, because obviously your background is in physical geography, if I'm not wrong, and you had a particular interest in sustainability, and then you've taken up in almost a hobby capacity beekeeping itself. So just maybe if we just start with the degree and sort of maybe some of your favourite or the highlights from that degree, including, I imagine, that trip you took to the United States.
Yes, of course. So, so I studied at Nottingham for 3 years, the University of Nottingham, and I, like you say, studied human geography. And like what really attracted me to human geography is the capacity it gives you to really understand your environment. So, if a layman looks at a river, all they see is a moving body of water. But once you get taught what, the processes behind the river's formation, you see the world through a different lens, and that's really attractive to me.
Yeah.
Instead of
I think you mean physical geography, right?
What did I say?
Human geography.
Right.
How the hell did you get it first?
Gotcha.
But do go on.
Sebi, that's an astute point. Context is everything when it comes to geography, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think you just gain a real appreciation for your surroundings that, not many other subjects do give you. Where someone would look at a tree, we can really understand the processes behind those, those living organisms, but also physical processes and landscapes and how they really form. Like, I think a good example was when BB and me went to the Lake District, and we could understand why the valleys were there and how they formed. And it gives you a real appreciation for, how these beautiful landscapes came about.
Yeah, you really do see the fingerprint of God, if I can put it in a more poetic sense.
What an eloquent way of putting it.
But no, there's things as mundane. It's interesting because you do notice things that other people might not, like random boulders in the middle of a U-shaped valley might well be glacial till from the Ice Age.
They probably are, to be honest. Where else would they come from? But most people would just be perplexed by the big boulder there, but we can really, in a way, imagine the processes behind that and visualize them, and I think that's, in a way, quite profound.
Yeah, and I'm coming in as a charlatan, really, because I didn't pursue physical geography in terms of my degree. It was the initial attraction of geography as a subject as a whole, though, holistically, because it was almost that geography was the most tangible subject in terms of understanding the real world, because I probably wasn't smart enough to understand physics, which is I suppose, a far more sophisticated way of looking at some of these natural processes and the quanta and all the things that go on in the quantum realm. But I felt like geography was the most real and tangible subject out there in terms of understanding the world that surrounds us.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I would also agree with your point that physical geography is the real geography. Yeah.
This is the age-old debate, isn't it?
Here we go.
Yeah,
Well,
I didn't think we'd get into
it's
this.
already.
Go on, Leo. Save human
this
geography.
is basically a Jerry Springer moment for geographers, isn't it? the age-old, we're at our throats. Human is more related to, how humans affect the wilderness. Therefore, it's more important because we are the sort of drivers of change. Where the physical geographers would argue, Mother Earth is everything. It's paramount, and it doesn't really matter what humans do. So they have almost like a fatalistic argument, and that's how they argue their corner. There's also, I suppose, Sebi, the kind of approach. You kind of alluded to it when you mentioned physics there, Andre. Is with physical geography, I suppose that could be kind of conceded as a more harder science, and therefore more worthy of geographers in general, more worthy of prestige, I suppose.
Yeah, well, Sebe is the recipient of a BSc, you see, as opposed to our mere BAs.
I am a scientist. I'm an acclaimed scientist.
He says with such zeal, such flair.
With lip smacking satisfaction, I could sense it across the few miles that separate us, Sebi. But no, I think for the first time I'm realising actually this is the subject that binds us and unites us is geography. We've got 3 geographers in the room here, lads.
Hey,
We do. Yeah, just realising this.
So I think, Sebi, where did was it from your interest of the natural world and understanding the dynamics behind the natural world that drew you towards bees and actually owning your own hives? Because that's not something most people can say.
So I've actually, because of this podcast and the opportunity to talk about like why I got into beekeeping, I've really had a good think about why the hell I'm kind of obsessed about bees and why most people aren't. So I think it is just a connection with a lot of my childhood memories, very like strong, happy memories of, English summer holidays and time spent in Kew Gardens and different parklands. And often those are associated with bees, just the sound of the bees, flowers, those are some of like the happiest memories I've ever had. And I think it's that association with bees being a happy thing, something I, associate with happy days. Some of the happiest days of my life is, a component of why I'm so interested and, want to be involved with them and have a deeper connection with them.
Wow, so quite a philosophical answer actually. It's not something I was expecting, but what a great answer to that question. And so do you think that being the starting point in terms of your interest in hives and beekeeping, has there been a new motivator that unearthed itself as you delved deeper into the intricacies and complexities of looking after the bees, the hives, the cycles, the seasonality, the swarming, all of that?
Yeah, so I think it's also from being interested in bees and having that positive association with them. I've also always kind of just been naturally interested in the environment and really enjoyed being outdoors. And a lot of people say that, but I really feel like my lifestyle as a resident of the urban area is just quite, grey and very much manipulated completely by humans. Everything's, very much groomed. All the parklands are. And I kind of always craved being actually present with true wilderness and truly wild animals, where, walking through Ealing, you'd be lucky to come across, I guess you would come across a pigeon and lucky if you'd see a wood pigeon at that. you'd probably write home if you saw a wood one. Yeah, I think it's just the attraction of being so closely and intricate, and so strongly interconnected with these animals, these completely wild animals, is just extremely attractive to me, because that little corner of my grandma's garden is the realm of the bees, and it isn't an area that's controlled by humans. It's an area controlled by them, and I'm entering their space. And there's also a fear involved with that, where I'm actually fearful of getting stung, and that also gives me a bit of a rush that
Wow.
I'm actually experiencing real wilderness here and real true nature, something that you just don't come across in London.
Sort of like an environment, Sebi, where the animals are in control and nature is in control, and that's, I suppose, that's quite an exotic feeling in London.
Exactly, yeah. And just being able to witness that is quite rare. I think it's unique, really. You just can't witness that. And like Bibi said, the intricacies of the life cycles and the behaviors, being able to spectate and sit by a beehive and watch them come in with the nectar and the pollen on their feet is quite beautiful in a way, and also just mesmerizing and quite magical. These insects are going out and landing on flowers, beautiful flowers, and sucking nectar from them, and then turning all this nectar from all these hundreds of thousands of flowers into honey. It just sounds mythical. It sounds like fantastical. They sound like fairies to me in a weird way, that they're such, pure, clean animals and have such like a pure, clean lifestyle.
They're almost stewards of nature, aren't they, Sebi? I mean, they're not just concerned with their own hive existence, but inadvertently they're creating beautiful growth patterns in a range of flora.
No, exactly, yeah. And they're just, I would say they're associated with the most beautiful things in nature. That is a flower. And, you have other insects like flies and things that you don't really associate with being beautiful. They have quite ugly life cycles. But with bees, it's all very much, very beautiful in a way. And it's just, I don't really know.
It sounds like you've got a very profoundly deep and almost philosophical connection with the bees, and you've sort of, I suppose, taken the time to really look at them, not just watch, but actually sit and, almost like a philosopher, draw insights from your observed experience. And it sounds, you would only be able to draw the insights you have by spending a significant amount of time just looking and being in the moment. No screens, just nature, and understanding that, I suppose, intricate and symbiotic relationship between the bees and the environment, and kind of being unable to distinguish one or the other, because the bees are the environment are the bees. And it's not like the plants and the flora and the fauna are different. They are one, they are Gaia, they are all.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, I also get a craving of wanting to be in nature and be involved with nature. And like I said earlier, when a lot of my fondest memories from childhood were bees, I was also always curious where these bees went, where they came from, what they were doing. And being a beekeeper, you really have a true insight into these animals' life cycles, and you can actually put your hand into the hive and interact with them. And I think that's just so exciting and very different in a way from anything else I've really experienced. And it's quite a pure activity. There isn't, it's not really influenced by humans. It's you're entering their world, and you're the alien in that situation, and that's a feeling you just don't get anywhere else.
Yeah, and I feel like it's interesting that you initially described the bees as animals, and it was, to me at least, that sounds like you're almost endowing them with a sentience, right? That most people wouldn't endow any sort of insect beings with. And it just speaks, I suppose, to the profound respect you have for the bees, and understanding, their intrinsic role within the wider environment and how important they are as natural pollinators, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just their capacity um, to to navigate, to do all the different you know behaviors that they do, such as rearing their young, all this from being a young bee to being a nurse bee in the beginnings of their life cycles to eventually graduating to be a forager. So it's just quite amazing. You don't really see insects. A lot of insects have relatively simplistic life cycles, but here you have a true community of, like you say, in a way they are quite, I'd say higher insects or even animals in a way.
With sentience.
Exactly.
And Sebi, is that because sort of the different stages in their life cycles are so distinct and different? They've got like very distinctive levels of maturity from, say, their early days to sort of the last days and the middle days.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite comparative to the human life cycle, where you get the young being quite dependent on the older bees and learning their way within the hive. And basically, the young bees are the nurse bees, so they look after the young and feed the young royal jelly and honey and pollen. And then eventually, because their value kind of drops with their age, because they're starting to near their end of their life cycle, they can take on the high risk job of foraging, where you're leaving the hive, and there is a high likelihood that they won't return because of just fluke coincidences, getting hit by a car. It's a dangerous world out there. So that's why you only see older forager bees, is because they're relatively the least valuable to the colony, and in terms of numbers of days left.
Yeah, I suppose number of utilizable days, if that's a word. But yeah, so I suppose
exactly.
they've almost hit their expiry date, and it's, I suppose, that cold almost calculation of a hive that is both maybe cold from the outsider's perspective, yet necessary to ensure it thrives, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And what do you describe the swarm of bees? Because it's not a hive is a human construct. So, what would you describe them as? The colony? Is it a colony?
Yeah, exactly. You'd call that population of bees headed by the queen a colony, and it's also, with being a beekeeper, you really get, like I said before, an insight into a hive, and I would compare it to the mechanism of a watch. So you've got the external clock face, and it looks relatively simplistic. There's some movement, but once you take the lid off or take the back of the watch off, there's like a beautiful, like mesmerizing complexity to it, and you could just stare at the back of a watch. The mechanism's in a way beautiful, and then that's the same way I find looking at a beehive is just, there's infinite complexity to all their behaviors, and somehow there's still these individual beings are interacting in unison and synchronicity towards an end goal.
Yeah, I've almost like seen that visually when you've taken a slide out of one of your hives, Sebi. You can almost see the analogy of the watch is very apt, because it's almost like you've got swirling cogs of bees in a very real visual sense. And whether that's because they're trying to tell the other bees where the pollen is, I understand that can be one of the signals, and the way they mimic it, they almost dance in almost a sequential and almost mathematically predictable way. They're very sophisticated as a swarm and as a colony, and it's very interesting when you lift that out, that there are recognizable patterns across that whole screen of honeycomb.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
And I believe that the patterns of the those divisions within the beehives, I believe they have some kind of link to the Fibonacci sequence. Did you ever hear anything about that, Sebi?
This is beyond my realm, Leo.
There's
I'm a simplistic
there's
beekeeper. You're overcomplicating the problem here.
There's a strange pattern which is also similar to the pattern that you see in many flowers. Sort of
the golden ratio.
The golden ratio, yes. That I was going to say Leonardo DiCaprio then, but Leonardo da Vinci observed. And I believe that the pattern of the hives actually falls under that ratio as well. So coming back to what you both were just saying, the mathematical, the patterns are almost mathematically predictable. And from what I understand, the way that the Fibonacci sequence and the bees interrelate is it's between different genders, male and female bees, and how they relate to the queen.
Yeah. Well, certainly when we talk about the golden ratio, it's a ratio that appears over and over again in nature, whether that's sort of the distancing of the buds on a flower or the shape of the petals. I think the constant itself in terms of the golden ratio is 1.618, and it appears across a variety of seemingly disparate areas within nature, not least probably the hives and the proportions that go into the, is it hexagons, Sebi, or pentagons? It's hexagons, right, that the honeycomb is comprised of.
Yeah, it's hexagons. I just reminded myself another element to my fascination and interest in beekeeping. I remember reading an article about a woman who was beekeeping, and she just wrote a section about it, and it kind of struck a chord with me. I'm not going to quote it or anything, but the idea comes from there. And it's just the process of opening up a hive. You need to get the smoker ready. So you got the smokiness of the whole process. It is because as a beekeeper, you need to be in a state of calm and tranquility and complete control, because if you're too sudden or sudden with your movements, you can alert the bees and they start to feel more angry, they feel more threatened. But if your movements are slower, more fluid, then they feel less alarmed and in less of danger. So you've got that element of being in that state of calm and tranquility and just really, fully focused on your now and your situation currently. Then you've got, so this is, what I'm trying to get at here is the sensual, what senses are going on whilst you're beekeeping. So you've got that state of mind. Then you've got the smokiness. You've got, the whiffs of the pine cones and the pine needles burning. And that's quite a spirit, in a way, like a frankincense smell. So the whole, you're getting quite a lot of this smell, and it is pleasurable. It is a really, really, really nice smell. So you're getting that as well. But then you're also getting this warm umami smell from the hive as well. This kind of deep, rich, honey-like smell coming up from the bees. And all this just comes into, a drowsy, woody, mellowy, warm smells. And the whole experience is, I'd say, is in a way quite spiritual.
Wow. It's almost it sounds like you say, Sebi, a religious ritual you're undertaking, and you're the high priest.
Exactly, yeah.
And you know what? He's even got special overalls for it.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, Sebi's got the full kit.
Really?
Sebi, tell Leo what it takes to open up a hive safely in the Western world, because there'll be mad people in the Far East that just do it naked.
Yeah.
Just dive in.
Yeah, so basically you just don't want to be stung, and some of my hives is actually hive to hive the behavior changes. So certain hives are more aggressive than others. It just depends on the type and the breed, but also the queen. But also you can sometimes have where a queen mates with a few drones, which are male bees. You can have periods where she's laying eggs from one drone, which are being fertilized by one drone, which is more aggressive than the next. So you get wet. So 1 week I could go to the hive and it's extremely aggressive at me, because at that point those eggs had hatched and I was getting attacked by the offspring of that angry drone. And then the next week after that, a calmer drone might have mated with the queen. Hence you get a different behavior of the hive, which is also quite interesting. But
that's fascinating.
Yeah, Yeah, because I had this horrible week or month of my hive just absolutely hating me and attacking me in this vicious way, and I got quite alarmed. Really, I got completely covered in bees, and I actually thought of possibly terminating the hive because it was just dangerous. They seemed extremely aggressive,
Yeah.
but thankfully I gave them a bit of time, and about a month later, the temperament of the hive was completely different and calm and completely normal.
Gosh. And you think this was just directly related to the sort of aggression of drones in that given month, then, Sebi?
Yeah, definitely. Because the way I went about opening the hives was identical, and yeah, it's known that sometimes a queen can mate with a drone which is from Africanized offspring, and Africanized bees within the beekeeping community is a scary thing. You don't want Africanized bees. These are the bees that basically chase you until until you don't you're not longer you can't run much further and you get smothered by them. These are like these are
Smell your
bees.
fear.
Yeah, exactly. So these horror stories of people being in pools and getting completely covered by bees and getting terribly attacked. These are often caused by Africanized bees, and people have Africanized bees for probably a month, and then hopefully, if the queen hasn't mated with too many Africanized drones, then that behavior will subside after time, which I think it was the case with me.
And Sebi, what's the terminology around the Africanized? Is that just a generic term in terms of the aggression, the spike in aggression, or is it a different species of bee to the layman here?
Yeah, so the Africanization, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure that is the genetic makeup of that line of bees, of that I don't know how to say it, of that genome, I
Yeah,
guess, of
that
bees.
dynasty or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. So you got European bees, but also I guess they interbred at some point with Africanized bees, and these bees are horribly aggressive and
Right.
will just basically swarm you. So as you open the hive, there will an alarm will go out, and basically the whole hive starts to basically want to cover you. And even with the full protection of the whole suit, head covering, some old trackies from some old gym trackies, and socks around the bottoms of them, it's alarming
Yeah.
because you're basically slowly losing light as the bees cover your face mask. And although you're not going to get stung, it's just a bit distressing and not
Yeah.
very
Yeah, I
much
can imagine.
fun. So
Gosh.
you better trust your equipment, and yeah,
Mm.
you don't want to be skimping on that.
So, Sebi, sometimes you see images on television or on the internet of people, often in the Far East, that are covered in bees on the bare skin.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that carries some risk. At what point would the bees perhaps turn in terms of their sort of temperament from peaceful and just covering a human body to suddenly aggressive? Is there sort of a human trait or a human movement that would make them suddenly switch, or is it nothing to do with that? Is it pure chance?
So with the bee beards that you see on the Guinness World Records and different mad people wearing them, basically in that instance they've taken a queen from a hive and put her in a little cage and put that cage on that man's beard or that man's chin. And when the bees think they've lost their queen, they go and look for her, so they sense her smell.
Mm.
And at the point where they find her, they swarm round her and try and protect her, in with the idea of producing another hive in that place, because they think the queen's left the hive to find a new location.
Yeah.
So at that point, they're preoccupied with building new comb, and they're preoccupied with making sure their queen's safe, and their aggression completely subsides. So they're not actually looking to sting anyone because they've got higher priorities. So that's why they're so docile, and you won't see the man with the beard with a horrible, I guess, red spotty beard afterwards because he's been stung hundreds of times.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what explains that behavior.
Incredible. So the presence of the queen on the beard will completely sort of silence any sort of aggression from them.
Exactly, yeah, because they think they're homeless and they really need to focus on finding a home and possibly building a home on that man's chin by starting to draw out comb on in and around his chin area.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all going to be a fashion. That's all the rage in the 2020s. I can see it already.
Hipster bee beards.
Yeah.
Yeah, just beards were so last year, guys. We need to move to bees now. Sebi, I really want to understand the mechanism behind the smoke. All I have heard that it's supposedly calming to the bees. So how does that work, and is that the case?
So what happens is a few mechanisms occur. So basically, smoke signifies in nature fire, doesn't it? So if the bees sense smoke, they think there's a fire coming towards them. So at that point, they need to self-preserve, and in the complete emergency, they might actually have to vacate that hive and swarm in emergency and leave so they don't all burn to death. So in order to leave that hive, what they need to do is prioritize the resources they have in that hive. So they smell the smoke, think fire's coming towards them, and you don't want to leave your hive with all that precious honey in it. So what they do is start gorging themselves on honey, basically just downing pints of honey each, just having an absolute field day, just gorging themselves. And so what this means is their stomachs become really, really full with honey. And this makes them, like you say, a bit more docile, a bit more groggy because of the amount of carbs they've just consumed. But also because as their abdomen swells, it's probably not abdomen, I don't know the insect name for that area. But as that swells, the actual sting changes its position and actually recesses into the body of the bee, so they're less likely to actually be able to successfully sting you as a result. But also, you're as a beekeeper approaching the hive, you're a secondary threat to them. Their primary threat is the smoke and the fire and making sure they don't all burn to death. You going through the hive and opening up and inspecting it is kind of a secondary problem to them. So they're not going to focus you, and they're probably not going to attack you because of that.
Right, that's fascinating, but it makes all the sense in the world. And in your experience, have you found it to be a pretty effective way of making the hive, the swarm, that bit more docile?
Oh, yeah, it's like a miracle cure.
It's
really
noticeable, is it?
Definitely. So once you've opened a hive, you kind of there's a noise to a hive. There's a buzz. There's a vibration. There's like a deep, I don't know, bellyish, like a bass sound, because they're all flapping their wings and all from all their activities. And as you go through the hive, you start to hear that deep, note of a noise become higher pitched as they become more and more annoyed at you interfering with their house. Yeah, exactly. So they're just slowly getting more and more anxious and annoyed at you. And so you're kind of listening out for that. You're imagining being a bee in that hive, and understanding that noise is really important to knowing when to smoke them. As that noise becomes higher pitched, indicating more annoyance, you just want to puff them a bit. A couple of times doesn't take much, and after that, the noise again subsides and it lowers, and the whole hive becomes calmer and forgets about you and remembers about the flame and the fire. And so again, it's like a distraction.
That's incredible. I mean, just the fact that you're almost like a musician there, Sebi. You're administering the smoke, and then the pitch of the buzz is altered as a result.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah, I had no idea that the smoke, until this conversation, that the smoke had such a huge effect on their behaviour. So that must, I mean, that sounds like a pretty ancient practice that's been around for a long, long time.
Yeah, so I think because it has such a massive effect on the bee's behavior, it has been used throughout the world, and
Hmm.
I think yeah, it's just used quite basically on every continent and by every beekeeper. It's basically um, our greatest weapon in our job. It's like the sacred potion is our smoke, and we swear by
Hmm.
it in every inspection. If you don't have smoke, you're basically asking to get attacked, and you're just causing the bees more stress in a way, and also you're probably causing yourself more injury.
Yeah. So I remember, Sebi, we were
Hmm.
watching that hilarious documentary around the hallucinogenic honey on Vice. Do you remember? And there was that Chinese guy who got absolutely had a bit too much, basically just passing out by the end of the documentary. But anyway, that honey was sort of infamously inaccessible in that they had to abseil down these sheer cliffs to get down to the hives that were hanging literally off an overhang of cliff. And what they had to do was abseil down these ropes made of vines and use these sort of hand thatched baskets to pick the honey. And I too remember they were using the smoke as a mitigator to the aggression of the bees. But it's interesting because do you remember, Sebi, that mad honey that they were talking about? I was reading an article recently about that honey, and apparently it's got a slightly bitter taste and a bit of a reddish colour. And apparently it's hallucinogenic by token of where the pollen that's created that honey has come from. So it comes from a few types of rhododendrons, which of course are now, I suppose, semi-native to the UK, given that we brought them over, or the Victorians brought them over back in the 1800s. In any case, that specific pollen seems to create this neurotoxin of some description, which creates these hallucinogenic effects in both animals and humans. And basically, depending on how much that person or animal consumes, the reactions can kind of range from hallucinations to a slower heartbeat to even, as serious as temporary paralysis and complete unconsciousness. And I suppose this leads me on to, Sebi, a nice entry and a gateway into the end product, or the reason a lot of people have hives, which is honey. And I just wanted to get maybe your angle and perspective on that process in terms of harvesting the honey. I'm sure that must have been, in quite a deep satisfaction sense, something you really enjoyed in terms of the amount of time and energy you invested in putting the hives together, getting the bees to make the hive their home, and then collecting, I suppose, the fruits of your labour.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the amount of honey you gather or harvest at the end of the
Mm.
season is a direct reflection of how much of a good beekeeper you've been and how well you've managed the colony throughout the year. And there is something kind of, primeval, like prehistoric about the process of harvesting your the fruits of your labor in the most kind of basic way. Such you could compare it, the farmer harvesting his
Mm.
crop, or the beekeeper harvesting his honey. Um, yeah, so it is extremely a rewarding task,
Mm.
and but it's all about balance. So you can't really be taking too much honey, because otherwise the bees basically that's the food source for their overwintering. So as there aren't any flowers over winter, they need that honey to be eaten as a source of energy for them to keep themselves at a certain temperature throughout winter. So if you take too much honey, they will starve to death and won't be able to survive. Um, so that's also a skill in knowing how much to take, and also not harvesting all of it. So if you have a frame full of honey, you might actually not harvest that honey until later into the winter, because you might actually still have to put that frame back if
Mm-hmm.
the acceleration, the honey is being eaten at an accelerated rate.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'd say it is an extremely rewarding task, and it's just been brilliant. And I would say I don't think this is biased, but my honey is probably the best tasting honey out there.
It tastes extra sweet when you've put all that work in, I'm sure.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
But it's amazing
exactly.
because to me, as the layman, until I understood this, Sebi, and I suppose it's obvious after the fact, but it didn't make sense to me at the time exactly, or I didn't quite understand the mechanism and the reasons as to why bees create the honey in the first place. I understood it was some sort of food source, but essentially what you're saying is it's rations for the winter, right? To get the colony through those hard months to make sure they see the spring.
Exactly. It's basically like their lard. It's basically like
Okay.
our belly fat. It's
Right.
it's what gets them through it's what gets them through the winter.
Yeah.
And by having that source of honey, like most insects, we can't really harvest any source of honey or anything, similar to it. And this is because the bees have found this process of producing and storing honey over winter, and this allows them to actually leave hibernation after winter earlier and get the first spring flowers. So it gives them a competitive advantage against all other insects in that they're allowed to sustain their numbers at a high number, and so they actually beat all the other insects as they actually, for example, a wasp queen, she she survives over winter alone. She doesn't have any workers with her, so she needs to build the whole hive from scratch, lay the eggs, wait for the eggs to hatch, and only then does she have wasps to work for her. But here, a bee colony has hundreds of bees ready to go at the first day of spring, and this is huge. And this is why the honeybee, is extremely successful as an insect.
Yeah, and this dynamic, Sebi, I mean, I don't know of any other insects, much less animals, that mirror this model in terms of having a single potentially point of failure in the queen. And I suppose putting all the chips on one number and making sure, I suppose in some respects it's quite a high risk strategy, but for whatever reason it stood the test of time because bees have been around since forever, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in a way, similar to an ant colony, the queen's sounds like she's in power, but actually she's really a slave to the colony. Her only job is to lay eggs. She doesn't really have any influence on any of the other bees. In the way we'd imagine a queen to be dictating the activities of the colony. But all she is really is just an egg slave, a slave to
Right.
just produce and lay eggs. It's not as glamorous as it sounds.
Yeah. You'd think she was some kind of benign ruler, some kind of dictator
Yeah.
of the hive, that commands all authority, kind of the Queen Poobah that has all these different exalted offices. But actually, from what you're saying, Sebi, she's actually more of the subservient one,
Ex-
you know, other than obviously the process of reproduction.
Exactly. She's basically a slave. She doesn't really get to leave the hive apart from when she mates. And after that, she loses her wings. So, no, she doesn't actually lose her wings. That's yeah, it's just she's probably got less freedom than any other bee out there.
So far from an absolute monarchy, but actually a servant leader, which is a lot of what a lot of today's human leaders in businesses and elsewhere aspire to be. So, Sebi, I'm really interested to understand the importance, because we get told over and over again the importance of bees as natural pollinators, and we get these scary images on social media and elsewhere of what a traditional supermarket would look like if bees were to vanish overnight. So, is this something you've ever taken an interest in terms of the wide? Obviously, we were talking about the microcosm of your particular beehives. Now, talking on the macro scale, is there still this risk that's posed to bees? I think if my memory serves me correctly, it was particularly around this nasty fungus that was affecting the bees' ability to fly, and their wings were distorted. I just want to understand whether that's still a dynamic that's at play and a risk to the bee colonies globally, And, are we heading slowly towards a potential population collapse?
Yeah, so there are many real, I guess, threats to the bee population from a pathogenic point of view. So you've got the colony collapse disorder, which is basically, I'm not sure, I haven't fully read up on this, but I think it might be the fungus you're referring to. But also you've got foul brood, and basically like us, any animal is afflicted with disease, and more recent domestication of bees in human-made hives has made the problem, exacerbated the problem. For example, I think we'll move on to this now, but the almond pollination in California is an event in a beekeeper's calendar in America, a huge event, basically.
Absolutely.
So basically every beekeeper in the US swarm in a way, pardon the pun, on into California so that they can release their hives and their bees to enable these almond farmers to fully pollinate all of their trees and to maximize their harvests. And so all of these beekeepers from the whole of the US converge on this one area of California. And this creates a huge mixing pot of just pathogens. Basically, all these bees are intermixing and they're all spreading and they're all passing on these different pathogens, for example, varroa mites, different types of mites, different types of diseases. And this practice has, accelerated the impact and increased, magnified the impact that these diseases have on the actual whole population of the honeybee, because often these honeybees do swarm and do go into the wild and intermix with wild bees, and so these terrible pathogens that might be able to be controlled by humans with medication, these wild colonies don't stand a chance because they don't have that aid. So the whole system is broken, basically.
It's really interesting you say that, because I was hoping that it wouldn't be an exacerbator of the existing problem around the spread of various diseases that hinder and kill the bee population. I thought actually that the market dynamics at hand, which are that we need more beekeepers and therefore we need more bees, and actually market dynamics dictate that it's actually profitable for you to be a beekeeper at this time, particularly if we're talking about the seasonality of the pollination of Californian almonds. I thought that might inadvertently almost help the bee population and turn more people towards beekeeping in the search for profit through a free market mechanism. But it sounds like it's actually doing the opposite in terms of the bee population and the sustainability of bees and the threat of disease to bees. It sounds like it's just propagating that problem, Sebi, on balance.
Exactly.
Right?
I guess there's a financial benefit to it to beekeepers, but on a, if you're looking at it from the point of the bee, you don't want to be really going on holiday to California in the almond season, because you're probably going to get very, very ill.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, these diseases, these pathogens, Sebi, they affect human populations as well as bee populations?
So I don't think so. It's just, I think because our physiology is so different that what afflicts a bee it can't really be transferred into human populations. I don't know, is that what you mean? Is that?
Well, just when you said going on holiday, that got me confused. But by the sounds of it, either way, the release of mass bees from all different corners of the US is more to the detriment of their life cycle right now and their own existence.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't clarify that. I meant the bees are going on holiday.
God.
A terrible holiday where they're going to catch a pandemic. So, Sebi, it doesn't sound like this is a lot of these diseases that are afflicting the bees isn't something that's going to pass, a bit like our current COVID situation. it sounds like it's something that's persistent, because it might not be of a viral nature. It might be, like we spoke earlier, a fungus amongst others, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's basically how well can your hive tolerate these pathogens. Every hive in the UK has these varroa and these aren't actually natural mites. They're basically, they've come from Persia or the Middle East, and they spread throughout the world's honeybee populations. And what they do is sit on a bee's, just basically, I don't know. I don't really know. I should have looked up the physiology of a bee, but
The thorax.
exactly, the thorax. Thank you. Thank
Taking
you.
a wild stab at that.
Let's
Shot
just
in
go
the
with
dark
that. Yeah. Basically, these mites suck the blood of bees, and they just weaken the colony. The bee can't fly as far because it's ill. It doesn't have as much energy, and so these problems are exacerbated by humans, because that varroa mite would have never been found in the UK
Right.
without humans moving these hives and these bee intermixing and interbreeding these bee populations throughout the world. So we're a huge accelerator of pathogenesis within these, insect communities.
So basically a blood-sucking parasite, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bastard. Evil.
And coming back to human and physical geography there, Sebi, you can see that they're both incredibly intertwined, aren't they? How they influence one another. Unfortunately, human meddling has not done too many favors for the bee population, it seems, globally.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really interesting point. I think that would be a great dissertation piece in really understanding how that's worked, and the history of bees and disease, and how humans have had a huge impact on that. You often hear about bee diseases and bees being ill, bees numbers declining, and that sounds like a natural mechanism. That sounds like something that's always been happening, but actually we're the real drivers of that. And it's essential for us to understand how that's happening, for us to be able to stop it and actually stop it. Yeah.
That's fascinating, but maybe unsurprising, because so many of these, I suppose, issues and negative dynamics are perpetuated from an anthropogenic perspective, right? It's a kind of, if we weren't in the equation, these things wouldn't have happened. And it's through the unnatural leverage of natural resources that these things seem to occur in a lot of cases, right? Whether that's fossil fuels, whether that's bees, whether that's fresh water.
Yes, exactly. It's just like the human hand just stirring up the mud in the water and making everything murky and not as it should be, in the perfect tranquility that it naturally, and the clear state in which it should be exist.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just the fact that for the first time in a while we're seeing finally the consequences of a cumulative effect of the anthropogenic hand on the natural world, right? And the planet's been around for billions of years, and it's really only been in the last 500 of those number of billion that we've kind of propagated in any significant number as human beings. And it's no surprise, therefore, that if the world deals in the time scale of millions of years, that something that happens very suddenly within the span of a few hundred, has unintended consequences, and quite catastrophic ones at that.
Yeah, exactly. It's scary, but also the developments and the medications that humans are using. There is a bright side to it. Is that it is extremely depressing what's going on, but through our intelligence and our technology, I think things will be alleviated, and with better knowledge of the situation, things might even be reversed into the future.
I agree. I think as dire as things may seem, I think human ingenuity will sort of win out, and ultimately technology will be our emancipator out of this.
Because one way to look at it really is that everything is balance, right? Pre-human, there's almost a way to look at the earth and everything on and in the earth as self-correcting. It's every time there's an imbalance, it gets corrected to equilibrium. I suppose the negative way of looking at human interference is that, in the past half millennia, humans have severely disrupted that self-correction and that balance. But on the other hand, you mentioned technology there, Andre, and as you just said, Seb, the answers are all in nature, for medicinal and even engineering and scientific progress. The answers have all been peppered around the earth. So I feel like optimistically, some kind of common sense or level of human ingenuity will prevail to get closer back to that original state.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in a very abstract, philosophical sense and poetic sense, but also in a very real sense, we are the universe trying to understand itself. And I suppose we're only going to really achieve that or get closer to that end goal by perpetuating our technological advancement and being better able to understand ourselves and our place in this universe, right? And I suppose that's really at the crux of what these podcasts are all about.
Absolutely. Seeing the centrality and connection between humans and the universe, humans as the universe. That's often what we find ourselves concluding on a lot of these podcasts. And there's definitely the relationship with bees. I feel like at least with the ways the bees themselves relate to the nature and resources around them definitely backs that point up.
Yeah. And I just want to finally explore sort of the hive as a metaphor in terms of how the hive-like consciousness has almost been adopted inadvertently by the internet or through the internet, right? So we have this now decentralized network, and it's amazing because people talk about no real value coming off the back of the internet because of so many of the internet services are seemingly, and I say seemingly with an underline and bold, free. Because you have the likes of YouTube, you have the likes of social media, you have the, those two particularly, the social media in all its variety and colour. And essentially what it is the democratization of information on a mass scale. And I think it's hard to monetize that and put a value and a number on that. But I think the impact and, I suppose, collective uprising of consciousness is non-trivial. I think it's huge, but I think it's very difficult and potentially impossible to put in monetary terms. But I think it's non-trivial.
It's far from trivial. I mean, it's a completely new way of organizing society, of organizing information and people, and the internet. I think what you're getting at here, Andre, is like a hive, and Sebi, maybe you can talk to this, as you've spent so many hours observing the hive behavior. The internet provides that kind of interconnected platform that is highly decentralized, sort of the worker bee fashion. Only through internet we observe, sharing of information, ideas, and also work too. But things in terms of work, labor, capital, ownership, everything we know is becoming more decentralized. Look at currency, look at cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
Everything, means of exchange, commerce is becoming more kind of complementary, interdependent, and decentralized, just like a beehive. There's got to be some credence to that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the decentralization dynamic is an overarching one, and you're seeing it across all kinds of space. Now, you're probably going to see it manifest first in the financial space, and that's why you've got the acronym DeFi, decentralized finance. And I think you're only going to see it accrue across all facets of life, whether that's your personal data. So you will have complete and utter control over your personal data, and you will have the option to sell out your personal data for a price, right? And the same will be true of politics. I hope we'll see the day where we engage with minor bills that get passed in the Commons at 6 p.m. when no one's paying attention, but we have the option to engage via an app through a decentralized ledger, right? Where we the truth is irrefutable through code and mathematics, which is what we're talking about when we talk about the blockchain. And I think the blockchain and a decentralized network can help on so many. It will potentially revolutionize the foundation of every business, is what I'm trying to say. And I think starting with finance. But I think the analogy is apt in terms of the hive, and I think the hive, in a sense, is a decentralized network. Although we do talk about the queen as a central node, I think we can almost look at the queen as a metaphor for humanity, and then every worker is as important as the worker next to him, and the worker next to him, and the worker next to him. We're all part of the same network, and there is almost this great equalization that happens when you talk about the blockchain and a decentralized ledger, essentially, which is what underlies any given blockchain.
Certainly with information sharing and the way new currencies and forms of exchange are being organized, there is something almost egalitarian about it, in the way that the blockchain ledgers are organizing society. You put it very eloquently there. The next worker is exactly the same worth as the next worker. And I can definitely say that that's true in terms of information sharing on the internet. For better or for worse, that's led to some fake news catastrophes, but it's also led to an incredible level of freedom in terms of information sharing and consumption that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's that exposure to information that's kind of a vice and a blessing all in one. So it's, I think what the blockchain will also do in a non-trivial way is provide an equality of opportunity, a true equality of opportunity across the board, which, as we know, is the right side of equality, right? We don't want equality of outcome because that's forced. And that's unfortunately what's happening in a lot of institutions and establishments today. What we want, for sure, and I find it very difficult for anyone to argue against this, is an equality of opportunity. Because why wouldn't you, right? Why would you want to exclude a particular group or a demographic from achieving their apex?
Right. Exactly.
Because it benefits the whole, right? Like a hive.
Absolutely. It benefits people at the top or the bottom.
I've never really thought about this in this sense, but as you talk about it, I really can see, the parallels between the two. Even with, with the internet, which is basically the most modern, artificial human construct that you can really imagine. It basically doesn't even physically exist, really. And as you say, over time, I feel like this artificial human, very robotic being is becoming, more fluid and biological in a way, and the complexity increases. So it's actually doing its own little loop of, being a man-made anthropogenic thing, to actually making the full loop back to, actually reinstating biological systems and biological complexity and biological thinking, which is, also like reflected in the hive, basically based on hive activity.
Yeah, well, you're even one step ahead there, Sebi. So you're talking about almost the integration of technology and biology, and cybernetics in terms of what Elon's doing with Neuralink. And I guess when the confluence of what Neuralink's trying to do in terms of combining hardware technology and circuitry with our wetware, when I talk about wetware, I talk about our flesh and blood. When we talk about that dynamic interplaying with the blockchain and what a decentralized internet looks like, where you are the internet end to end, there's no middleman, there's no bank between you and your money, you are your money, you are your bank, you're everything, like the full stack, top to bottom, and you are technologically integrated. Although this might sound like something out of Cyberpunk 2077, I think it's the reality we're going to see play out over the next 50, 100 years, and then, out into the future. But I think it's really interesting what we can speculate about it now, and sort of the parallels we can draw to the insect world, particularly the hive.
And Sebi, to that point that Andre has just made, the sort of hive-esque, decentralized nature of society that we seem to be darting towards. Obviously, that carries positives. It carries a lot of great opportunities for egalitarianism in terms of opportunity. It really does carry a lot of positives, but it also carries issues of alienation and misinformation. So, just really from all that you've seen in your beekeeping life, how would you say, what could we learn from the hive-like mind, the sort of hive-like approach to human consciousness, Sebi?
I believe that, in a way, that every bee looks after the next bee, and although we say the way things are moving is to a decentralized source of power and the individual becoming more important, the human society doesn't really act in the same way. I'd say it's more selfish. The individual will benefit, and a certain group of individuals will benefit, but a lot of people will suffer, I think, as a result of this. Although it is positive, I'd say the positives outweigh the negatives. A lot of people out there will feel extremely alienated by these changes, and a lot of people need management, and a lot of people need a leadership and controls and limits, and that's often what people will crave at the end of the day is a sense of unidirectional management. So I'd say the differences are that human society is more selfish, and that people don't really look out in the same way that bees do for each other, and that can cause problems, I feel.
Brilliant point. Absolutely brilliant point there. Yeah, we're not comparing apples with apples here. There's things to learn from hive-like consciousness. But absolutely, if you leave humans completely unlimited in what they can do, they can innovate, but they can also cause a hell of a lot of damage. So I suppose it's a very different scenario with humans that unfortunately, although I like to be optimistic about human progress, and I am, carries a lot more selfish individualism.
So I think what we can learn from the bees is that we need to temper potentially the coming wave of individualism with a equal and balanced wave of compassion and understanding.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Marvellous. Sebi, I think that's a great point to conclude on. Thanks for coming on. It's been an absolute education, at least for me. And
absolutely. I concur.
I concur. It's been a really fascinating. You seem like a bottomless pit of information and knowledge when it comes to bees and beekeeping, and it's no surprise given you've had the beehives now for a number of years, haven't you?
Yeah, 3 years now.
Wow. So yeah, it's been an absolute education, and thanks for coming on, and I'm sure we'll have you back in the not too distant future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me, and I very much look forward to coming back on the Brobears podcast.
Brilliant. All right, Brobear, for the last
Time.
Take care. All the best.
Biological Brobear.
Biological Brobear. Tatty bye.
Cheers.
Everybody, over and out. Pow!
Over and out. Pa-pow!